Show for you today. I'm Amber Duke, back at the desk with Niall Standage.
Great to see you, Amber. Team Friday, back reunited once again.
Yes, I love it. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Let's start off with some sound from the president yesterday.
He's not the first. People leave my administration and they love us. And then at some point they miss it so badly. And some of them embrace it and some of them actually become hostile. I don't know what it is. It's sort of Trump derangement syndrome, I guess they call it.
Former presidential advisor and head of DOJ, Elon Musk, accused of having Trump derangement syndrome following a messy and prolonged war of words on social media Thursday. Musk and Trump are set to speak on the phone today in what's expected to be, as you can imagine, a tense conversation.
Musk has been a recent vocal critic, to put it mildly, of House Republicans' reconciliation package, dubbed the Big Beautiful Bill. Here's President Trump's response to that criticism.
I'm very disappointed because Elon knew the inner workings of this bill better than almost anybody sitting here, better than you people. He knew everything about it. He had no problem with it. All of a sudden he had a problem, and he only developed the problem when he found out that we're going to have to cut the EV mandate, because that's billions and billions of dollars.
Musk was apparently watching and posted his response on X. Quote, "Whatever, keep the EV solar incentive cuts in the bill, even though no oil and gas subsidies are touched. Very unfair. But ditch the mountain of disgusting pork in the bill." Minutes later, Trump said this about Musk.
We've done a great job. Elon knew that. Elon endorsed me very strongly. He actually went up and campaigned for me. I think I would have won. Susie would say I would have won Pennsylvania easily anyway.
And with that, we were off to the races. Musk biting back, saying, quote, "Without me, Trump would have lost the election, Dems would control the House, and Republicans would be 51-49 in the Senate. Such ingratitude."
Following the press conference, Trump took to Truth Social to say that Elon was, quote, "wearing thin," and that he just went crazy. In a later post, Trump suggested that he should terminate Musk's government contracts.
Musk quickly responded, saying that SpaceX would immediately decommission its Dragon capsule. But the war of words reached its most critical point when Musk posted this, quote, "Time to drop the really big bomb. Trump is in the Epstein files. That is the real reason they have not been made public." Capping it with, "Mark this post for the future, the truth will come out." Musk also seemed to endorse the idea of impeaching President Trump and replacing him with Vice President Vance, responding yes when another ex-user made that suggestion.
He also posted a poll asking if it's time to create a new political party to represent the, quote, 80% in the middle. That prompted Steve Bannon to suggest deporting him. Take a listen.
President Trump tonight should sign an executive order calling for the Defense Production Act to be called in SpaceX and seize SpaceX tonight before midnight. I happen to believe, given the facts that I've been shown, that he's an illegal alien, and illegal aliens got to be deported.
Well, who could have guessed that Elon Musk and Donald Trump would end up falling out? Has been predicted for a long time. It has happened in quite spectacular fashion. It's happened comparatively suddenly when they were all so nice to each other up until around about a week ago when Elon Musk began with these criticisms of the bill. Look, I mean, let's not skip past the fact that this is all very entertaining, and I certainly am among those who takes a certain amount of glee at all this. There are genuine issues, but one of the things I find interesting is both Musk and Trump citing arguments about the other that were previously heard predominantly on the left. So Trump is arguing that Musk is all twisted up because of incentives for electric vehicles being discontinued or because of a fit of pique over the NASA administrator. Musk, of course, the headline grabbing thing was the Epstein files, but also citing past remarks of Trump's about balancing the budget and so forth that Trump has now moved way away from, fueling this idea that Donald Trump will basically say anything and doesn't really have fixed principles.
I thought it was interesting that Elon Musk has repeatedly claimed that he doesn't support the EV credits, but then in that tweet was like, it's very unfair, though, that the oil and gas people get subsidies and I don't. But you know, talking to congressional sources yesterday, one of the things that they pointed out is that they feel like they obviously owe a lot to Elon Musk for his attempts to cut a lot of government waste and general spending, but they feel like he doesn't understand the political process. This is a reconciliation bill. This is mostly mandatory spending. There is the $10 billion rescissions package that the White House has sent to Congress, which they say is the way to actually get the DOGE cuts on the discretionary spending. And so they're kind of confused about Musk's criticism of the big, beautiful bill, because that's not really the avenue when you're going through this reconciliation process to make huge cuts. They do include a lot of new spending for priorities like the border, getting rid of taxpayer-funded gender surgeries and other Republican priorities. And so I think there was a lot of frustration with Musk trying to lobby Congress on something that they felt like was really kind of separate from the DOGE cuts.
I agree in the sense of, talking to people around town here in Washington, there's definitely a lot of exasperation with Musk among congressional Republicans, Washington Republicans generally, and I think there are some valid reasons for that. And you mentioned about the rescissions package, which he doesn't really appear to recognize. To my mind, in the politics of this, one of the bigger dangers for Trump is Musk, like him or hate him, and I'm obviously not a fan, has a very direct line into the online right, particularly, younger populists. I don't know if they'd even describe themselves as conservatives exactly, but the kind of the people who were like the Ian Miles Chungs of the world, who was one of the people that we were citing without naming him in the introduction there. So Musk, I think, does have the propensity or the capability to at least muddy Trump up to some extent with that constituency, even as the people that we're talking about, the kind of office holders, are, I think, more loyal to Trump than Musk.
Yeah, I think that's true to an extent. Emily Brooks at The Hill did some reporting on Musk's call for people to actually call their congresspeople and ask for this bill to be pulled. She said based on everyone she spoke to on Capitol Hill, they actually haven't received any calls. So maybe his pull on X or Twitter is a little bit different than real life, which is sort of the common refrain in politics. Twitter is not real life. Also from the White House, some of the other things that they've been citing as sort of boiling tensions over the past few months, even more so than just the last week over the big, beautiful bill, is a lot of people in the administration felt like Elon was trying to be co-president with Trump, taking control of a lot of departments instead of allowing the agency heads to make the ultimate decisions, asking for big things like the NASA administrator as well as the IRS commissioner, the head of the CIA, and some other really high-level administrative positions. And people were starting to get frustrated that they felt like they were supposed to answer to Musk as well as Donald Trump, and that created a lot of confusion and sort of an internal power struggle. Sure,
and I think it's almost indisputable that Musk's ego let him get carried away and led him in to some of those very turbulent waters, shall we say. Anyhow, coming up, a straight woman who says she lost 2 jobs to gay co-workers takes her case all the way to the Supreme Court. Stick with us, that's next.
The Supreme Court handing a win to a woman who claimed discrimination after she twice lost a job to a gay coworker. The most surprising part, the ruling was unanimous.
Here's what happened. Marlene Ames, the administrator of an Ohio-based program to address prison rape and other forms of abuse, applied for a promotion in 2019. She was denied the role, with supervisors saying she lacked vision and leadership skills. That job was later given to a gay woman who had been at the department for a shorter time and, unlike Ames, lacked a college degree. Not long after that, Ames was demoted and a gay man with less seniority replaced her. Ames sued and lower courts initially ruled against her, saying that as a member of a majority group, she needed to prove, quote, background circumstances that support the suspicion that the defendant is the unusual employer who discriminates against the majority.
The Supreme Court, however, called bull, saying in the majority opinion that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does not draw distinctions between majority and minority plaintiffs. The ruling was widely praised on the right, Nick Sortor taking to act, saying in part, the Supreme Court just ruled unanimously that reverse discrimination is discrimination. I can't believe this had to be litigated at the Supreme Court, but this is a big win regardless. Megyn Kelly likewise saying on X, you can't discriminate against straight people in favor of LGBTs in hiring. Wow, sanity.
But Keith Olbermann biting back at Megyn Kelly, saying, quote, it's hilarious that creatures like Kelly who decry DEI will never understand they are DEI and would have never gotten anywhere without it.
Oh boy.
Can I just say, while we're on the topic of him, many, many years ago, when Salon was more widely read than it is now, I wrote a piece for Salon about how terrible Keith Olbermann was, despite sharing many of my overall views. I think I don't know what he's talking about. Creatures like Megyn Kelly and words like that. I think he's a fairly appalling individual. Anyhow, this is a very interesting case. And I think that you tell me your views first of all.
Sure. Well, what was interesting is that you have Ketanji Brown Jackson delivering the opinion of the court. It's unanimous, and they're making the point. Look, the discrimination doesn't depend on whether or not the member.
And I was in the extremely rare position of agreeing with Clarence Thomas, who was concurring, but making the additional argument that it's actually much more difficult than it appears on the surface to define who is a majority and who is a minority. Thomas was using the hypothetical of a black worker in Detroit. Well, the majority of workers in Detroit are black, but they are a minority in Michigan and obviously a minority in the nation at large. So it's actually harder than it appears to be to rule as to who should meet the higher standard.
Yeah, and that's an important point. I mean, if you think about maybe an LGBT activist organization like a Human Rights Campaign, if the majority of employees do identify with the LGBT group, would the straight person then be considered a minority in that case, or would they still be considered a majority because they're the majority of the population? So yeah, I think that's very cogent and prescient. The other interesting thing about this case is that they cited Bostock, which was, of course, a case that rankled a lot of conservatives because of the inclusion of things like gender identity as protected categories. But Ketanji Brown Jackson does cite that case in here, saying the law's focus on individuals rather than groups is anything but academic. Bostock versus Clayton County, by establishing the same protections for every individual without regard to that individual's membership in a minority or majority group, Congress left no room for courts to impose special requirements on majority group plaintiffs alone. So maybe that's a little bit of cover for conservatives who were upset with Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett for that decision, to see that it has gone some way in getting rid of these, I guess as Megyn Kelly would say, DEI requirements.
Yeah, and these debates have been going on for a long time, and they're always genuinely fascinating. Another case that Ketanji Brown Jackson cited in that ruling was going back to the 1970s. I think it was a railroad, a plaintiff, an employee of a railroad taking a case against them. And the ruling then was that a white person is entitled to exactly the same protections that they would be had they been discriminated against as a black employee of that organization would have been. Just finally, in sort of closing this out, Amber, I actually took some measure of reassurance or optimism from this case, because to me it's like, oh, the system has actually worked here. There was previously, I think, a good faith attempt to deal with discriminatory practices. It may have been clumsily phrased or gone too far, and now the court has looked at it and gone, you know, that's not quite right. We need to tweak that a bit, and good for them.
A lot of people now saying that it's now white girl summer.
I will make no comment on that at all. But meanwhile, we'll go on to New York, where we wonder, should Andrew Cuomo be worried about the New York City mayoral race? Maybe because AOC just backed his rival. We'll discuss that now. A rising star on the left, Zohran Mamdani, has one more reason to celebrate. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just endorsed him for mayor of New York City. Mamdani has surged to second place in the race, though he is still trailing behind former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. AOC recently has made headlines for her fighting oligarchy tour with Senator Bernie Sanders. She's also sparked 2028 presidential speculation.
On the other hand, Mamdani is a relative newcomer to politics. He's represented New York's 36th state assembly district, but this is his first high-profile election. So how much of a gamble is this endorsement for AOC? Well, some social media users think it's pretty significant. Maury Litwack says AOC endorsing Mamdani is the radical left putting all their chips in. If Mamdani wins, they effectively lead the Democratic Party. If he loses, it's a major setback for their ability to scale. AOC can't run for Senate or president if they can't win mayor. June 24th is a major event and litmus test that you don't want to miss.
That seems largely fair enough to me. That I don't know anything about Maury Litwack, but that seems a fair point. I mean, I think that the criticism, of course, that the left always faces is, oh, well, you're destined to lose elections. You need to be in the centre to win. Perhaps worth noting in passing that 4 years ago, AOC endorsed Mayor Wiley, who was the left-wing candidate for New York mayor at that time. Didn't do a whole lot of good. Mayor Wiley lost. Eric Adams is obviously now the mayor. We could talk for a long time about Eric Adams and his many troubles, but the point is, at the time, his victory in the primary was a defeat for the left. So I do think it is an important race. I don't think Mamdani is sure to win by any means. He's still trailing Cuomo in the polls by a considerable margin. But I think AOC had to endorse. He's pretty clearly the candidate who lines up most closely with her. He's a democratic socialist. There was actually quite a lot of dissatisfaction on the left about how long it was taking her to make an endorsement. So I think she's right to back him. One other complication that people who don't follow New York politics might not be completely aware of is that the primary is so-called ranked choice voting, where you fill out preferences, and if lower polling candidates get eliminated, it transfers to another person. That might give Mamdani a slightly better chance if there's an anti-Cuomo bloc. But what do you make of all that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I do think that AOC has more clout this time around than she did in the last mayoral election. She's become more of a national star and I think has moderated to an extent from some of her previous progressive positions. Mamdani is not a moderate, obviously, by any means. Right. But there was an interesting moment in the primary debate where the candidates were asked if they would travel to Israel or if they would travel abroad as mayors of New York City. And he was the only person who said, no, actually, my focus is on the people of New York. And I, granted, disagree with him on a lot of policy positions, but I thought that was really refreshing for him to acknowledge what his priorities are meant to be as a mayor of a major U.S. city and not falling into this trap of trying to be the world's mayor and certainly not putting so much attention on Israel. I'm not sure why that would be the role of the New York mayor. Right. I saw some chatter online, well, the New York mayor is such a big position that they have major influence on the global stage. And it's like, come on, guys, they're not the president. No, I mean, they're not supposed to really be involved in foreign policy. Right. So I did appreciate that he was willing to take that stance. Yeah,
I think it's right both to focus on the bread and butter issues of New Yorkers and to veer away from all of that. And to my mind, it's a kind of move away from just this idea that you appeal to certain ethnic blocs in America. Many years ago, when I first came from Ireland to live in New York, and I remember reporting on New York politics, and I remember a strategist saying to me, there used to be a rule in New York politics of appealing to the three I's, which were Ireland, Italy, and Israel, in terms of the voting blocs in New York City. That has obviously changed very significantly, and good for Mamdani to do that. We should perhaps say that, I mean, part of the reason he takes that view is that he is extremely critical of Israel and its conduct in relation to Gaza. He uses the word genocide, which AOC does not, and so he's obviously aligned with a different view. But he wants his campaign to be mostly about things like offering free bus rides across the city, rent controls and things like that. Things that a good conservative like you would be appalled at, Amber, but he's still making his play for it, I think.
He is, yeah. I do think one of the moments in the debate that did trip him up was he was asked about previous comments saying that the New York Police Department was a wicked institution and that he would defund them if possible. He denied saying that. It's on his Twitter account. I'm looking at it right now. Which is, okay. That's a little problematic. And I'm not sure that that kind of rhetoric is going to play with New York right now when crime is obviously top of mind for a lot of New Yorkers. I think people are really frustrated with Eric Adams for thinking that he was going to be the sort of police candidate of the left to take on some of those issues, and they're a little dissatisfied with his tenure on that. Also frustrated with his ability, or his willingness rather, to work with the Trump administration. And Andrew Cuomo and Mamdani have taken the tack that Trump is an existential threat to the country and to democracy, but also feel like, at least on Cuomo's side, that immigration and crime are indeed issues facing New Yorkers, and so they need to address those. But Cuomo also has all of these scandals floating over his head, which does open up a door for perhaps a progressive challenger.
No, 100%. I mean, I am frankly surprised that Cuomo is leading in the polls by as much as he is. To my mind, that is perhaps as much a reflection of name recognition as anything else, because both in terms of the accusations of sexual misconduct, which he denies, and I think even more damningly, the COVID stuff, where he way played down the deaths in New York City nursing homes. I mean, I know that COVID is moving into the rearview mirror, but the ethics of that seem to me to be very close to disqualifying.
Yeah, one thing I always say about big cities is that people are willing to tolerate a certain level of corruption if they have an effective mayor, and maybe Cuomo's a reflection of that, of how much they're really willing to take.
Absolutely, I think that could be the case.
Senator Chuck Grassley, meanwhile, is saying that former FBI Director Christopher Wray gave false testimony to Congress in 2023. We'll find out why next. Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley has released documents that he says contradict testimony from former FBI Director Christopher Wray. In 2023, the FBI internally drafted what's now called the Richmond memo.
In a nutshell, that memo suggested that there could be a link between traditional Catholic groups and domestic extremism.
Now, the FBI docs Grassley released show that the notorious Richmond memo was distributed to more than 1,000 FBI employees around the country. Moreover, the new tranche shows more documents of a similar bent existed.
Then FBI Director Christopher Wray testified about the memo in July 2023. Here's what he had to say.
Your FBI wrote a memo talking about radical traditional Catholics. I'm just wondering if you could define it for us.
Well, what I can tell you is you're referring to the Richmond product, which was a single product by a single field office, which as soon as I found out about it, I was aghast and ordered it withdrawn and removed from FBI systems.
In a recent letter to FBI Director Kash Patel, Grassley wrote, Director Wray's testimony was inaccurate not only because it failed to reveal the scope of the memo's production and dissemination, but also because it failed to reveal the existence of a second draft product on the same topic intended for external distribution to the whole FBI. He continued, I continue to investigate the Richmond memo and the culture at the FBI that allowed it to be produced and approved.
Lots to discuss on this one, Amber. So I will take the view that the FBI didn't really do anything wrong here, and I'm sure you have a very different view on that. But let me just explain as best I can why I think that. One of the things that comes up often in political debates from the right is the idea that because of wokeness or leftism, we are not using the words that we should, we're not calling things what they are. And the criticism in this case is that traditional or radical Catholicism is somehow being unfairly blamed or unfairly painted as being linked to extremism. This case goes back to a guy who came onto the FBI's radar initially because he was predicting civil war and was talking about the murder of politicians. This guy then joins a self-described traditionalist Catholic congregation in 2022. He is continuing online to talk in very extreme terms. He described himself as a rad-trad Catholic clerical fascist. He then went on to acquire weapons, to buy a truck, and on an online video saying was the last thing he was doing to prepare for an attack. Various other actions that at a bare minimum made him a legitimate target for an FBI investigation. To then pretend that his religious views were not part of that worldview when he explicitly said they were seems nonsensical to me. There was an obvious through line between the religious beliefs he held and what he was apparently planning to do.
The problem, though, is that his apparent religious beliefs were completely inconsistent with the Catholic faith. Traditional Catholicism doesn't call for any of those things. It obviously rejects violence of all forms, calls for peacemaking, calls for treating people equally and with love. So he intentionally manipulated Catholic teaching in order to try to justify his views. The FBI then decided that because he identified as Catholic, that there must be some broader extremist movement broiling within traditional Catholic churches, particularly with people who attend traditional Latin Mass, and suggested that rather than just investigate the people who were around this guy, that they would actually try to develop sources within traditional Latin Masses to go to traditional Catholic churches because they believed that other extremists could crop up out of this movement. And I think you would agree, Niall, that the over-policing of Muslims post 9/11, where it was assumed that because the attackers on 9/11 held radical Islamist views and in that sense manipulated their religion to cause this attack that took many American lives, that the FBI had to have an outsized focus on mosques or going to traditional Islamic centers in the United States. I really view this as much of the same, where there was this unnecessary expansion of an effort to root out legitimate extremists by connecting it to religion. And obviously in this country we have freedom of religion. There is nothing in a traditional Latin Mass that would provoke someone to want to commit an attack like the one that this guy was planning. I know, I've been to many of them.
So on the issue of Islam and post 9/11, you're actually, I think, you believe that I have more of a problem with some of the law enforcement actions than that. I don't actually have as big a problem with it as perhaps you might think I do. Now, when people are actually being set up, that's a different question. But to my mind, if someone is adhering to religious beliefs and is using those religious beliefs as a pretext for acts of violence, I do think that the FBI has a legitimate reason to investigate those, irrespective of whether they are Muslim or Christian or any other religion. And this goes, I think, to a bigger philosophical difference, perhaps, which is that as someone who is secular, I sometimes think that there is a tendency among religious groups of various kinds to not only say we should have freedom of religion, which of course you should, but to use religiosity as a kind of shield or cape to claim exemption from the same kind of investigations that would pertain to a non-religious person carrying out the same actions for a political purpose, for example, a Marxist purpose or an extreme right white nationalist purpose. And in relation to the radical or traditional Catholicism, one of the reasons the FBI sent out this memo in the first place was that they did cite at least two other instances. One, a guy who's now deceased in Portland, who was posting photos of himself inside a church with the suggestion that people should, quote, join the Catholic Taliban, and was being investigated for civil disturbance, vandalism, and weapons violations. And a separate guy in Milwaukee who was similarly hewing to, I would say, extreme or radical Catholic beliefs, and was going around trying to buy untraceable guns. So it's not that everyone who is a traditional Catholic or who has a problem with Vatican II is a terrorist threat, but it is saying there are these instances of overlap. So in the same way as we might look at a quote-unquote radical mosque, we can look at individuals within these radical Catholic
But the problem is they're
congregations.
citing three individuals of the largest religion across the globe with millions of adherents in the United States, tens of millions of adherents in the United States, and suggesting that it's the teachings, the theology, the ideology of the Catholic Church that led these people to do this, but they haven't identified anything in Catholic teaching that would actually spur those beliefs.
Well, you're saying Catholic teaching. I mean, their argument is, or was, that there was a fringe version of Catholicism that had considerable overlap with anti-Semitism, white nationalism, anti-gay hatred. And they're saying that because there was that overlap, it is legitimate to have these investigations. They are not saying the Bible says that people should kill the Jews. It's saying that there is overlap in these rather fringy versions of Catholicism these activities.
But there is no fringy version of Catholicism. It's a very top-down religion, right? Anytime you go to Mass, you can go anywhere in the world. I was just in Portugal. I went to a Mass. It was in Portuguese. I still could follow along and know exactly when to kneel, sit, stand, which prayers to recite. It is very consistent at every Mass you go to. Everybody teaches the same exact thing. So what's the fringe Catholicism?
Well, but you say it's top-down, but these guys were attending church services that do not recognize Vatican II, right?
It's not that they don't recognize Vatican II. There's still an allowance from Rome that there are exceptions and abilities for churches to celebrate traditional Latin Mass. And
right, but they're not part of the, what is the correct terminology? They are not part of official Catholic communion, is that right?
Oh, then they're not Catholic.
Well, I believe that that was one of the factors cited in these things, that it was the Society of St. Pius X, I believe, is the organization in particular that has been cited as I think it's fair to say, fringy, but perhaps you...
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, if you're not in communion with the Catholic Church, then to blame fringe Catholicism is just is definitionally inaccurate, because if you're not in communion with the Church, you're not Catholic.
Well, I think they're saying
it's not like the Southern Baptist Convention where they have like all of these offshoots, right?
Right. I mean, they are saying that the traditional, trad, radical traditionalism, is a version of the Catholic Church that its adherents believe to be the keeper of the flame of true Catholicism.
Yeah,
no?
I think that shows that they don't really know that much about Catholicism. But
Fair enough.
California Governor Newsom dissing the majority of California voters? We'll get into that next. Is Gavin Newsom ignoring Californians? The outgoing governor is facing backlash after failing to fund the tough on crime Prop 36 in the state's budget. In November, 68% of voters in the Golden Gate state voted for the ballot measure that puts tougher consequences in place for retail theft, hard drug, and fentanyl-related offenses. It also mandates treatment for nonviolent drug offenders.
Skyrocketing retail robberies, smash and grabs, and open fentanyl dealing inspired the measure. Local news reported signs of improvement following its passage, but not a dime was spared for Prop 36. Newsom has opposed the initiative all along, citing the dangers of mass incarceration and warning against unintended impacts it could have on black and brown communities.
Steve Hilton, who's running for governor in California, posted on X, quote, "The message was clear. Restore consequences, offer recovery, stop the cycle. Liberals love to chant no justice, no peace. When it was time to fund real justice, they vanished." 70% of Californians approved Prop 36 over 6 months ago, and the governor still hasn't funded it. Our dangerous, deadly, and brazen crime is the result of years of progressive policy failures. The people did their part. Time for the governor to do his. Enough is enough.
We should say probably, I've now lost the name of that person. I don't think we credited who said that, which was, I guess, a state senator in California. You have there we go, Senator Marie Alvarado Gil. I hope I'm pronouncing the senator's name correctly. Anyway, you have some thoughts on this, Amber? Go for it.
I do, yeah. The Daily Caller News Foundation sent a reporter out to talk to Californians about this, and the ones that they spoke to are pretty upset that Newsom has not provided funding for this. And I really can't see an explanation as to why he wouldn't, especially since he's considering running for governor on apparently a more moderate Democratic platform, or running for president on a more moderate Democratic platform than a lot of the members of his party. It seems like tackling tough on crime policies, particularly ones that have been approved by the majority of Californians, would be a no-brainer.
Yes, but I think it's a little more complicated than that, would be my counter-argument. Because when this proposal was put forward, its advocates notably did not provide a means of funding it. And the proposition that passed had a balance of a kind in that it was making certain offences more serious than they would otherwise be, but it was also providing repeat offenders with an alternative to a custodial sentence, which was drug treatment, essentially, or treatment for addiction. No one ever said where the money for that was coming from. And so it was, I think, a little bit of sleight of hand on the part of advocates to say, we want to pass this thing, but we're not going to say how we're going to fund it. Newsom's argument, or one of his arguments that he makes in his own defence, is if people wanted this at the county level, and a lot of county supervisors were among the advocates of it, they can try to fund it out of county taxes. That obviously hasn't happened yet. It is worth saying, just before we get into the rest of this, that this is a counter-reaction to a proposition that was passed more than a decade ago that had made the criminal justice system slightly more lenient. One of the reasons for that was that at the time California had a massive prison population, to the extent that it had been ordered by the Supreme Court to jail fewer people. And I noticed the Public Policy Institute of California said that that earlier, more lenient measure had led to $800 million of savings, partly because they were having to pay to incarcerate fewer people.
Yeah, I think at this point the Californians, though, are really fed up with the idea that they get taxed out the wahoo, and yet they apparently can't find the money to tackle crime, which is one of the biggest issues facing the state. And although it would be great for local communities, counties to fund this themselves, it was a statewide proposition that was approved by the majority of voters. So I do think it's incumbent on the governor to get a bit creative here and figure out a way to get this into the budget.
Yeah, I mean, it was, it was passed by a very sizable majority, more than 60%, 68% I say we have on screen. So yes, it did have a lot of popular support, and, my argument is more about the merits of the idea than whether it should be funded or not. The voters have spoken, and it seems reasonable that it should go into effect in some shape or form. I do think the lack of funding mechanism was disingenuous. I also wonder, honestly, if it's the wrong solution to the problem, because one of the intriguing things about California when you look at those rising crime rates is they did not begin when the earlier lenient proposition was passed. They began in and around COVID. And of course, complicating that picture further, in and around when COVID was at its height was also when George Floyd protests were at their height, and there was lots of rhetoric about the police, which you and I have, I think, different views on, but was certainly a big societal factor. So what exactly caused that rise of crime is the question.
Yeah, I would argue that COVID and the George Floyd protests exacerbated a trend that was already happening in California, certainly around the United States. But a lot of people during the COVID pandemic realized that the penalties for things like shoplifting, smash and grabs were really pretty low, and that they could repeatedly commit these same crimes, and as long as they were under a certain dollar amount of what they were taking from Target, they wouldn't be stopped by security guards, and if they did get caught by police later on, they would likely get out of jail and not have to serve any prison time. And so once people heard that, right, and realized that, they continued to do it. A lot of the smash and grab and retail theft perpetrators tend to be the same people that do it over and over and over again, because there's no 3 strikes rule, obviously. There's not really much indication that in California, if you are a repeat offender, that you get a harsher sentence, so long as you're committing the same crime over and over again. I think the other important element of this is the fact that there is this requirement for treatment for people who have committed crimes out of struggles with drug abuse, right? And a lot of the criminal justice reform policies and narrative has been around the idea that drug abusers should get some leniency because they were maybe not in the right state of mind when they committed those crimes. And I think that's a reasonable thing to say. However, a lot of these individuals also don't have the wherewithal or the desire to get treatment. And in current policy in California, you can't force people to get treatment. One of the important mechanisms for doing that is by having a choice. You either go to prison or you go to a treatment center. If you remove the prison alternative, a lot of people just go back out on the street and continue to live in really desolate conditions.
I think that is a fair point. I mean, if people are afflicted by addiction but also have no particular desire to have that addiction treated, then I think there is a genuine and interesting question about what the state should be empowered to do. If they are committing crimes while under the influence, then obviously the state should have much more power to take action. Up next, it's clear that some Democrats were not welcome at the party's Welcome Fest this week. Stay with us.
The New York Times is calling it the CPAC of the center. Welcome Fest, a meeting of centrist Democratic Party members trying to work out the future of their party's messaging. 6 months, of course, after their devastating November election losses. The gathering, which took place in Washington, D.C. on Wednesday, is leaving the party's more left-wing factions out.
According to Liam Kerr, a co-founder of Welcome PAC, organizer of the event, the centre has been energised to take on the party's left. According to the New York Times, rather than discussing policy or messaging plans, much of the day was focused on dismissing the party's left wing, saying that they didn't have any strategy to win elections. Just moments after, New York Congressman Richie Torres fired some shots at these groups. This happened.
Hundreds of thousands of people dead, innocent women, pregnant children.
Oh, enough already. Freedom is a beautiful thing.
Online reactions also quickly surfaced, some users on X writing, the juxtaposition of calling it Welcome Fest and your pitch being F everybody else, LOL. Wipe Welcome Fest off the face of the earth. They will make sure that the Democrats never win another election in our lifetime. Hashtag Loserfest.
Welcome PAC's Lauren Harper Pope, a former advisor to Congressman Beto O'Rourke, responded with force, saying, quote, "If the left feels threatened by what we're doing, then I say, you're still welcome in our coalition." Oh, lovely.
Maybe empty words there.
Maybe so. They don't seem all that welcome. I also don't necessarily think Beto O'Rourke would be the greatest advert for election-winning strategies himself. But
Fair enough.
That's a whole other thing. I mean, I do have a bit of derision about this Welcome Fest idea. Not that there aren't genuine arguments to be had about where the Democrats position themselves, but where I have the objection to this kind of thing is that, to me, it falls into a sort of classic Washington trap, which is assuming that the more moderate or centrist position is always right. It's a kind of fetishizing of centrism. And I don't think that's true at all. I think the best ideas are the ones that should win out, regardless of their ideological complexion. And sometimes on a certain issue, I might personally favor views that are harder to the left, and sometimes I might not. But this idea that that centrism is a goal to be aimed for, I find that fairly risible.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, just Trump is emblematic of this, right? He's fairly left-wing on economics and also has very right-wing positions on things like immigration and social issues outside of abortion. So it's very clear that a cobbling together of the most popular positions on the right and the left is much more election winning than trying to just always be the moderate or the centrist. And this really reminds me of that no labels effort that sprung up over the past 10 years or so in reaction to Trump. In the last election, they tried to recruit Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema to run for president against Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and that really got them nowhere. They've raised millions of dollars, but the coalition basically fell apart as soon as Trump won the nomination.
100%, and that just seemed to me I was extremely skeptical of that whole effort. Talking of Manchin, somebody at Welcome Fest, I think it was one of the organizers the New York Times mentioned, was walking around in a West Virginia University football jersey from Manchin's day as this quarterback, with Manchin's name and number on the back. And the idea that there is this huge legion of people willing to rally to the Joe Manchin standard seems highly implausible to me. I come back to the point that you made, Amber, which is about how, different issues call for different policies, and you can make whatever argument you like, but this, a lot of these more centrist people would argue that the left is ideologically captured or whatever, and is just sheepishly following a whole laundry list of proposals. But these guys have their own laundry list of proposals. They're just different proposals and more quote-unquote moderate ones. And so if you and I have had the conversation before about the difference between economic kind of populism, minimum wage, whatever, and the kind of identitarian politics, particularly on the trans issue, that I would absolutely acknowledge has caused Democrats real problems electorally.
Yeah, I mean, it's all really down to what you define as centrism. Is centrism just establishmentarianism? Is it neoliberalism, which typically seems to be the case, right? Is that they're supportive of nation building, they love going to war, American influence around the globe, and then at home they're sort of business as usual on the economy. There's nothing that I think really speaks to voters in a really compelling way anymore, and that's why the old Republican and Democratic establishments have really been blown up by the party's bases of 20% respectively on each side that are very passionate about issues that cut against that typical thinking.
And are more, I think, aligned with where voters actually are in each party.
Right. All right, that's actually going to do it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.